Someone was desperately trying to break into the cockpit while the plane dropped toward the mountains. On another flight, a pilot quietly apologized to passengers moments before impact. These recordings captured the final minutes of flights that went terribly wrong, and some of them still disturb investigators decades later. Germanwings Flight 9525. In 2015, a normal flight across Europe suddenly became one of the most disturbing aviation disasters in modern history. After the captain briefly stepped out of the cockpit, the co-pilot locked the door behind him and quietly began descending toward the French Alps. At first, the knocking outside sounded calm and controlled, but within minutes, it became desperate. The cockpit recorder captured repeated attempts to force the door open, while alarms warned the aircraft was rapidly losing altitude. What disturbed investigators most was the silence inside the cockpit. The co-pilot barely spoke as terrified passengers slowly realized something was terribly wrong. Moments later, the aircraft disappeared into the mountains, leaving behind one of the most haunting black box recordings ever recovered. Japan Airlines Flight 123. On August 12, 1985, hundreds of passengers boarded a flight from Tokyo expecting a short trip home. Just minutes after takeoff, a loud explosion ripped through the rear of the aircraft. The damage destroyed critical flight controls, leaving pilots struggling to keep the massive plane stable. For more than 30 terrifying minutes, the crew fought desperately to avoid crashing into the mountains below. At first, their voices remained calm and professional while speaking with air traffic control. But as the aircraft became harder to control, exhaustion and fear slowly crept into the cockpit. One pilot reportedly apologized to passengers while trying to save everyone on board. The plane eventually crashed into a mountainside, becoming the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history. United Airlines Flight 93. On September 11, 2001, passengers aboard Flight 93 learned through phone calls that other hijacked planes had already been used in deadly attacks across America. Realizing their own flight was part of the same operation, the passengers made a decision that would change history. The cockpit voice recorder later captured shouting, crashing sounds, and the chaos of people rushing forward together. One passenger famously said, "Let's roll," moments before the group attempted to retake the aircraft. Investigators later believed their actions prevented another major attack. Even today, the recording remains too sensitive to release publicly. But what makes the story unforgettable is not only the fear inside that aircraft. It was the courage people found during their final moments. Air France Flight 447. Late one night in 2009, an Air France flight vanished over the Atlantic Ocean during severe weather. For nearly 2 years, nobody knew exactly what happened. When investigators finally recovered the black boxes from the ocean floor, the cockpit audio revealed confusion unfolding in complete darkness. Ice crystals had blocked important speed sensors, causing the autopilot to suddenly disconnect. The pilots quickly became disoriented, while warning alarms echoed through the cockpit again and again. One pilot mistakenly kept pulling the aircraft upward, unknowingly causing a deadly stall. What makes the case especially disturbing is how close they came to recovery. For several minutes, the aircraft was still technically controllable. But the crew never fully understood what was happening until it was far too late. Tenerife Airport Disaster. In 1977, two fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft found themselves trapped on the same fog-covered runway in Tenerife. Visibility was so poor that pilots could barely see ahead of them. Inside one cockpit, a captain believed he had clearance to begin takeoff. But another aircraft was still directly ahead on the runway. Seconds before disaster, a flight engineer quietly questioned whether the path was actually clear. His concern was brushed aside. Then suddenly, through the thick fog, the other plane appeared. Pilots attempted desperate last-second maneuvers, but there was no time left. The collision killed hundreds of people and became the deadliest accident in aviation history. Investigators later said a few misunderstood words changed global aviation communication forever. FedEx Flight 705. Most cockpit recordings capture accidents. This one captured a brutal fight for survival. In 1994, a FedEx cargo flight was hijacked by a disgruntled employee secretly carrying hammers and a spear gun. His plan was horrifying. He intended to kill the crew and crash the aircraft intentionally. The cockpit recorder later captured violent impacts, shouting, and desperate breathing, as pilots fought back only feet away from the controls. Despite suffering severe injuries, the crew refused to give up. At one point, the aircraft rolled sharply through the sky, while the struggle continued inside the cockpit. Against all odds, the pilots eventually overpowered the attacker and safely landed the plane. Investigators later called it one of the most incredible survival stories in aviation history. Helios Airways Flight 522. In 2005, a passenger jet silently crossed the skies above Greece, while almost everyone on board slowly lost consciousness. The disaster began with a simple maintenance mistake involving cabin pressurization. Shortly after takeoff, warning alarms repeatedly sounded inside the cockpit. But the pilots misunderstood what the alerts actually meant. As oxygen levels dropped, their speech became slower and increasingly confused before the cockpit eventually fell silent. Fighter pilots sent to investigate later reported seeing passengers motionless inside the cabin. Hours later, a flight attendant briefly entered the cockpit while still conscious, desperately trying to regain control of the aircraft. But by then, the engines were already shutting down from lack of fuel. And this is where the story becomes disturbing. The aircraft had continued flying almost completely empty of awareness. Saudia Flight 163. In 1980, smoke suddenly began filling a Saudi Arabian passenger jet shortly after takeoff from Riyadh. The pilot successfully managed to return the aircraft to the airport and land safely, which should have saved everyone on board. But what happened next shocked investigators. Instead of immediately evacuating the aircraft, confusion inside the cockpit delayed critical decisions. While smoke continued spreading through the cabin, passengers trapped behind sealed doors desperately waited for rescue crews outside. By the time firefighters finally entered the aircraft, everyone on board had died from smoke inhalation. Investigators later discovered that panic and delayed communication inside the cockpit played a major role in the tragedy. What makes this case so haunting is that the plane actually landed safely. Survival had been possible. Alaska Airlines Flight 261. At first, the pilots of Alaska Airlines Flight 261 sounded calm while discussing a mechanical problem affecting the aircraft's controls. They even joked briefly with maintenance crews while trying to troubleshoot the issue. But the mood inside the cockpit changed rapidly when the aircraft suddenly pitched downward without warning. The recorder captured the crew desperately trying to pull the plane back under control while warning air traffic controllers they were in serious trouble. Witnesses later described seeing the aircraft diving violently over the Pacific Ocean before crashing into the water. Investigators eventually blamed a critical mechanical failure linked to poor maintenance practices. What makes the recording difficult to hear is how long the pilots continued fighting to save everyone on board, even after realizing the situation was almost hopeless. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. More than a decade later, Flight 370 remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries. Unlike every other case on this list, investigators never recovered the cockpit voice recorder. The final confirmed transmission sounded completely normal. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Then the aircraft vanished. No distress call, no confirmed explanation, nothing. Families were left without answers, while theories spread across the world for years. Search teams scanned enormous sections of the ocean, yet many questions still remain unanswered today. And maybe that is what makes this case so disturbing. Sometimes the scariest mystery is not what people heard inside the cockpit, but the silence that came after. Which cockpit voice recorder story disturbed you the most? And if you could hear one unreleased black box recording, which case would you choose? If you enjoy dark mysteries and unexplained stories like this, consider subscribing to Dark Uncovered for more videos.